Hello and welcome to another Tri-tutors video. In today's video we're going to be analysing the poem Nobody Loses All the Time by E. Cummings. So firstly, a little bit of information about our poet to start off. E. Cummings was an American author who lived between 1894 and 1962. One of his trademarks is that his poetry utilizes grammar in a very distinctive way. It's definitely seen in Nobody Loses All the Time, so we'll have a discussion about it when we talk about structure. And he experienced World War I firsthand. Let's get into the poem. Nobody loses all the time. I had an uncle named Sol who was a born failure, and nearly everybody said he should have gone into vaudeville, perhaps because my Uncle Sol could sing McCann. He was a diver on Xmas Eve like hell itself, which may or may not account for the fact that my Uncle Sol indulged in that possibly most inexcusable of all, to use a highfalutin phrase, luxuries, that is, or to wit farming, and be it needlessly added. So starting off with our title, Nobody Loses All the Time. It's quite an interesting title to read. It's a little bit shocking to read as well. It's maybe a bit unexpected. And we're going to see through the poem, it's a narrative poem. We're telling the story of Uncle Sol, and he's supposed to be the one that's proving that nobody loses all the time. We're going to discuss it a little bit later when we get to the end of the poem. So starting off with the first line, I had an uncle named Sol who was a born failure. Starting off with small letters, no capital letters, first person narrative. Already starting with no capital letters, going against the convention. Conventional punctuation shows us how Sol goes against convention. And we also see that through the use of enjambment, the lack of punctuation. He is defying expectations, defying what is sort of written for him or what he should be doing perhaps, and following his own path. It's also going against, like we said, the conventions of society. He's failing at life, and so it's almost sort of disordered and disorganized. His life is very unpredictable and doesn't seem to go as planned. He seems to be losing all of the time. He was a born failure. Now, this is a little bit of an oxymoron, because if you are a failure, it means that you've done something and then you haven't succeeded in it. So therefore, it doesn't seem to make sense. It's a bit contradictory to say that someone's a born failure. But this sort of implies to us that maybe Uncle Sol is destined to fail in some way, destined to not be successful. Everybody said he should have gone into vaudeville. Vaudeville is the sort of over-the-top type of theatre that was popular in a certain time period in not recent times, sort of early 20th century, because he could perform. So he seemed to be this performer, but we're going to see that he doesn't actually follow that performer route. He goes sort of the opposite way. May or may not account, this is very colloquial, very conversational, and we'll see throughout the poem, because as it starts off it seems alright, but it gets into darker and darker themes, but the tone really continues to remain comical, ironic, conversational, and colloquial, and so therefore it turns into a little bit of a flippant tone when he's talking about something. The speaker's addressing something that's actually really serious, like his uncle's life and how he always seemed to lose, and sort of going against the title of Nobody Loses All the Time, and it seems like Uncle Sol does lose all the time, but he still approaches it with this sort of air of a conversational element and very easygoing sort of wording and phrasing, and so we can see that the speaker is quite flippant and satirical in his intention. Sol indulged in that possibly most inexcusable of all, to use a highfalutin phrase, luxuries. So we also should note that there is an irregular line length. There's some lines that are long, some lines that are short. There's a very unpredictable movement to the poem and flow to the poem. And this shows us, also emphasizes Uncle Sol's life. So using the word indulged over here is a little bit ironic, because it's going to talk about how he did not go into performing as people suspected that he would. He went into farming, and farming is not something that's usually associated with indulgence. It's hard work. It's a laborious job. It's something that requires a lot of energy and a lot of consistent effort. And he says, to use a highfalutin phrase is sort of like this pretentious way of saying something. And throughout this poem, the use of diction is quite significant. The use of highfalutin, later on splendiferous, auspicious, these are words that seem out of place in terms of what is being described. They are words that are ostentatious and pretentious. So the irony, the luxury as well, the use of the word luxury in regard to farming. Farming is not a luxurious job per se. They say with farming, and it needlessly added. my Uncle Sol's farm failed because the chickens ate the vegetables. So my Uncle Sol had a chicken farm till the skunks ate the chickens. So here we see the use of till, that conversational tone continuing to happen, and the enjambment showing how failure is inevitable and continuous. And so here we have this terrible cycle of he's trying to create this farm, but it is not successful. He does not have the practical skills to deal with the demands of farming, and the chickens eat the vegetables. But Uncle Sol makes a plan. So he decides, okay, he's going to have a chicken farm. So we can see the characterization of Sol. Yes, he's a failure. Yes, things seem to be going wrong. But at the same time, he is quite optimistic, or he attempts to remain optimistic, at least at this point in time. Until the skunks ate the chickens. When my Uncle Sol had a skunk farm, but the skunks caught cold and died, so my Uncle Sol imitates the skunks in a subtle manner. So over here we've got the skunks caught cold. We have alliteration of the harsh C sound showing the harshness of their deaths. And then we have a very flippant line over here. My Uncle Sol imitated the skunks in a subtle manner, insinuating that he killed himself, but clearly he's not just imitating them, because if someone is to go to that extent, then it is something that is a deeper issue. So we see that Uncle Sol's life is riddled with mental health concerns and riddled with losses and failures that have not just been something that he can move on from, but they have actually affected him. So it seems like as the speaker's talking, he's very dismissive of all of Uncle Sol's failures, but they do seem to actually have an impact on Uncle Sol. And the use of subtle manner is ironic because it's not subtle at all what he does by imitating the skunks. So the use of subtle manner is an ironic phrase. Or by drowning himself in the water tank. But somebody who'd given my uncle a victual and records while he lived, presented to him upon the auspicious occasion of his decease a scrumptious, not to mention splendiferous funeral, with tall boys in black gloves and flowers and everything. And I remember we all cried like the Missouri when my Uncle Sol's coffin lurched because somebody pressed a button, and down went my Uncle Sol and started a worm from. So use of the word or over there shows there's a little bit of doubt surrounding his death about how it actually transpired. But then we have this allusion to a victual record, and we see that there's actually Uncle Sol was actually cared for, and he has this very ostentatious funeral which has been sort of sponsored, which has been paid for, and there's so many people that come and they're all crying, and there's this level of ceremony and pomp which is quite unexpected given that the way that his life has just been described has been quite lonely, quite a bit of a failure. But now we actually see that in his death he is, quite appreciated and sort of celebrated even. The diction of auspicious is quite interesting because auspicious means holy. So describing his funeral as a holy occasion is slightly unexpected. Scrumptious also means delicious. So it's a bit of a strange way to describe a funeral. And splendiferous means splendid. But these are words that we don't, or at least splendiferous is not a very commonly used word. It's a highfalutin phrase. It's a pretentious word, if you will. And so it's showing us this sort of contrast, or this unexpected, this irony of the life that he had versus the funeral that he has. With tall boys in black gloves and flowers and everything. So imagery, there's much panoply and ceremony, and this is ironic given the apparent failure of his life. I remember we all cried like the Missouri. The personal reflection. This is a personal story. This is his comment on his Uncle Sol's life. Cried like the Missouri. Missouri is a name of a river, using a simile over here, and also hyperbole, right? This is an over-exaggeration. When my Uncle Sol's coffin lurched, so even his funeral sort of fails. Even his coffin doesn't go down the way it's supposed to. There are issues, there are mistakes, there are errors. So as much as his funeral seems to be very different from his life, at the same time there are elements that seem to be in alignment in the sense that there's failure involved. Because somebody pressed a button, and down went my Uncle Sol. The word soul on the line by itself is isolated. It shows how vulnerable he is. He shows how he lived his life as a failure, or thinking he was a failure without anyone to support him. And in death, he's also alone, and started a worm farm. So we have the parentheses to show us that he's now underground, but he's still sort of failing or losing in some ways. Although he's actually winning in the sense that he is remaining optimistic and productive and sort of starting his own worm farm. The final line, like we said, most of the poem has this very flippant tone, and it's very dark comedy and imagery in the final line of talking about a dead body as creating a worm farm, as being fodder for the worms. And we don't know if this worm farm is successful, if we sort of end the story over there. But going back to the title, like I said earlier, nobody loses all the time. As we get through the poem, it seems like actually Uncle Sol is proving that sentiment wrong, that he does seem to be losing all of the time. But ultimately, perhaps he's successful in starting this worm farm, which is, this dark comedy or this dark humor. But also his optimistic spirit perhaps also means that he doesn't lose. He keeps finding a solution. He keeps trying to do something. But we can see through the structure and through the tone, there's just so many ironic things in this poem that going against our expectations, really challenging the way we think about convention and what success truly means, what losing truly means, what failure truly means. So the characterization of Uncle Sol is that he's a failure or a loser, it seems, yet he keeps on trying. And I think that makes him quite human. If we think about humanity, if we think about what makes us human, it's not that we live perfect lives. It's not that we're always successful. It's even not that we're always failing. It's how we get up from failure and how we move on. So actually, Uncle Sol, we can think about him. Yes, he seems to be this comedic character, sort of a caricature personality, the way that the speaker presents him. But underneath that, he seems actually to be quite human. The structure of the poem, as we spoke about before, there is a lot of enjambment, there is a lack of punctuation, there's very limited capital letters, and all of this is showing this resistance to convention and highlighting the sense of irony and going against expectations, and also the continuation of Uncle Sol's failures of each of the lines bleeding into the next one. The tone is flippant, sarcastic, reflective, satirical, and conversational. The mood is quite humorous, but there's sort of a dark humor as well. And so at some points it could be a little bit depressing too. And the theme and message is about the futility of life, legacy, failure, and memory. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found this video helpful. Please remember to like the video and to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.